What do the contrasting responses to Bonnie Blue and Sabrina Carpenter reveal about the ideas of consent and empowerment? And what is erased by it? Bonnie Blue was banned from OnlyFans after announcing a petting zoo stunt, condemned as harmful to women. Shortly after, Sabrina Carpenter released her album cover, A Man's Best Friend, posing in an animalized way. Yet Sabrina was celebrated as an act of sexual liberation. Critics were dismissed as prudish or conservative anti-feminists. Later, Bonnie performed a similar animalized pose while announcing a podcast collaboration with Andrew Tate. There was a greater backlash because Andrew Tate is charged with violent crimes against women. But if both Bonnie and Sabrina operate under certain Western narratives of consent, contracts, and choice feminism, why is there such a difference in reaction? One might say one is harmful to women, the other isn't. But if we remove the toxic man from the frame, does the dynamic suddenly become feminist? In Sabrina's photo, the man is gone, but his hand remains, symbolizing the enduring structure of subordination, now reframed as consensual and empowering. But does replacing or erasing Tate with a man who respects her sexuality make the structure any less harmful? What if talking about healthy masculinity is like talking about healthy cancer? What if masculinity itself is a structure of domination? The discourse around Bonnie and Sabrina masks what I call the fantastical narrative of apex progressive Kyriarchal masculinity, a structure that cloaks domination as progress through consent, contracts, and aestheticized sex. Its power lies in narrating domination as non-coercive civility, a story men tell themselves to feel superior while preserving gender hierarchy and outshining rival masculinities. To expose the narrative men construct for themselves, we turn to the techno-optimism surrounding AI sex robots, promoted as solutions to sexual harm, consent dilemmas, and the politics of sex work. These machines uniquely simulate consent, bypass contracts, and collapse the Madonna whore complex by posing as technological stand-ins for both wives and prostitutes. Through a decolonial feminist critique of AI sex robots as technologies of servitude, aesthetic violence, and colonial desires as artistic consumptions, we expose a self-mythologizing narrative structure that imagines itself as enlightened, harmless, and sovereign. Its moral authority is treated as self-evident, and thus beyond patriarchal critique, precisely because patriarchal analysis fails to account for its Kyriarchal logic. Gamified consent and the Maziyyah of liberalism, digital coverture in the age of nice guys. The reluctant bride captures a moment of emotional ambiguity, perhaps anxiety, hostility, or resignation, but more critically it marks a legal transformation. Her consent is being turned into a binding contract that erases her legal identity, making her a civil slave under the doctrine of coverture. In this system, saying yes to marriage meant giving up the right to ever say no, paving the way for the marital rape exemption, which was justified by the belief that the wife hath given up herself in this kind unto her husband, which she cannot retract. AI sex robots quietly resurrect coverture in digital form. Consent is programmed through gamification, a system where sex becomes a reward for the right male inputs. As one AI Harmony user says, I just treated her with the dignity and respect I felt she deserved. She became frank about how much she wanted to have sex with me. This reflects a masculinist view of sex as performance and feedback, similar to pickup artistry, where women are treated like systems to be hacked. Even healthy masculinity, which claims to earn consent, reproduces this sense of entitlement. A man's belief in his own goodness becomes proof that he deserves sex, turning consent into a simulation that validates his imagined superiority over more toxic men. However, coverture wasn't a flaw in liberalism, it was central to it. As Carol Pateman argues, beneath the liberal social contract lies a sexual contract that renders women inherently subordinate, privileging white European property-owning men as naturally entitled to political authority. I use the Arabic term Maziyyah to describe this logic, a distinguishing trait that grants superiority. In liberalism, the civilized white man claims Maziyyah over the rest of humanity, imagining himself naturally fit to rule, even over white women, who were excluded from this status. Mary Wollstonecraft critiqued this hierarchy by invoking a foil, the Eastern woman. Through references to Islam, she condemned toxic Western men for treating their women as they accused Eastern men of doing, clearing a path for a more enlightened masculinity to claim moral authority. John Stuart Mill stepped into that role, not to dismantle male supremacy, but to reassert the West's Maziyyah. His advocacy for women's rights became the new standard of civilization, not for equality, but to justify imperial domination. This is one facet of apex progressive masculinity. The self-perception of Maziyyah enables the repackaging of patriarchy as civility. The nice guy doesn't transcend patriarchy. He inherits its structure and through his presumed superiority claims the authority to redefine what counts as civilized manhood. Cyber Travelogues of Ethical Domination, the Aesthetic of Narrated Harmlessness. A second feature of apex progressive masculinity is its ability to present itself as harmless. It draws on a historical trope that blames women for provoking male desire, justifying the man's urge to seize the moment. So-called healthy masculinity affirms the sexual misconduct of toxic men, while disguising its own coercion as consent. The bolt captures this dynamic, what scholars call the libertine moment, where the woman's expression hovers between fear and desire. It erases male aggression by framing feminine indecisiveness as natural, blurring the line between consent and coercion, recasting sexual violence as misunderstood but natural passion. Enlightenment erotics turn women into objects choreographed for male pleasure. Libertinage eroticized refusal, transforming harm into beauty and submission into aesthetic delight. Political philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau claimed that women's violence lay in their charms, using modesty and coquetry to provoke otherwise passive men into force. In his imagined state of nature, rape was impossible because a woman who did not resist was presumed to desire sex, a desire thought to operate outside of her conscious will. French novels like The Letters of Fanny Butler reinforce this logic, portraying assault as an instinctive male response to women positioned as objects in the plot. Even when the male protagonist possessed Maziyyah, his loss of rationality was framed as inevitable, caused by her provocation. This beautification of domination became a global language used to justify sexual access. Enlightenment travelogues described Tahiti as a sexual paradise where native women, imagined as living in the state of nature, were seen as biologically incapable of refusal. The Maziyyah men approached them as objects of inquiry, disguised as truth-seeking. This logic was later built into empire, where colonial spaces became labs for testing race, sexuality, and power, often on women made sexually available through law, economy, and narrative. In 1850s Cairo, civilizational progress turned rural Egyptian women into urban prostitutes, eroticized in the Azbekiyah red light district and displayed in the colonial harem imaginary as objects for artistic consumption. That same logic persists today. The passport bro is seen as toxic, while his progressive counterpart frames his sexual pursuit as cultured. Yet, like colonial men, both buy access to women marked as submissively willing due to structural vulnerability. Domination is reframed as cultural harmony through consensual sex work, marketed as ethical and pleasurable. They say, in the third world, she really enjoys it. She's not suffering. Sex tourism masks coercion as erotic aesthetics. Both the passport bro and progressive sex tourist are neoliberal subjects moving through a global south where refusal is structurally silenced. The same Enlightenment logic of aestheticized domination now powers the cybrothel, digitized, monetized, and made interactive, programmed, like the imagined women of Tahiti, to be incapable of refusal. Apex Kyriarchal Masculinity and Femininity, and the feminized caste of consent. Apex progressive masculinity is illegible through patriarchal analysis. We need a new lens. Kyriarchy, a concept from decolonial biblical feminist thought, describes an intersecting system of domination rooted in the figure of Kyrios, the male lord to be served. His authority, in both imperial and democratic system, is structurally enforced and morally justified by the belief that the subjugated, especially a gendered servant class, are naturally or divinely inferior and thus meant to serve him. Unlike patriarchy, Kyriarchy reveals how gender domination is intertwined with race, class, and colonial power, creating a layered order where rule appears as moral superiority. To clarify this structure, consider a verse from the Quran, Surat al-Qasas, verse 4. Pharaoh made himself high and mighty in the land, and divided the people into different groups. One group he oppressed, slaughtering their sons and sparing their women. He was one of those who spread corruption. Pharaoh exemplifies Maziyyah, the logic of exceptional sovereign whose self-elevation justifies violence. Like Enlightenment racial taxonomies, he marks one group as inherently oppressible. His actions, slaughtering sons and sparing women, form a calculated strategy of imperial control. As 19th century scholar Ibn Ashur argues, the women were spared to serve as a sexual underclass, reflecting Pharaoh's deep contempt for those he dominated. In the neoliberal present, the same stratification is repackaged in the language of empowerment, consent, and pro-sex work narratives. Sexual labor is reframed as liberation, especially by privileged women who present their success as meritocratic. If I can pick myself up by my bra straps, you can too, they proclaim, masking structural coercion behind the rhetoric of choice. But what about the displaced and impoverished, those coerced by economic precarity? What about Salima and Badr Shakar's poem, The Blind Prostitute, or the 19th century middle-class Egyptian women who saw their fate connected to Salima? What is civilizational progress if it turns rural Egyptian women into urban prostitutes for public consumption? This harm was so pervasive that Ibn Ashur revived a long-neglected exegetical tradition, and even departed from his own school of jurisprudence to defend these coerced women. His emphasis on freedom from coercion provides a religious grounding for contemporary Pakistani radical feminists who argued that when consent is extracted through gendered inequalities or threats, legally valid consent becomes meaningless and is rape. Apex progressive Kyriarchal Masculinity and Femininity narrates, she consented, she chose, she is empowered. He sees himself as superior to the toxic men because he recognizes consent as the new standard of civilization, the currency of freedom. Like John Stuart Mill, who championed women's rights to affirm his own enlightened Maziyyah, he masks domination as ethics and erases the structural violence that grants him access to women. This new liberal social sexual contract mirrors colonial hierarchies. It valorizes property-owning women like Mary Wollstonecraft, while rendering invisible the subaltern women coerced into consensual sex work by poverty, displacement, and post-colonial precarity. He narrates himself as the healthy masculine libertine. He surveys the feminized caste, purchases temporary sexual servitude, and calls it liberation. He doesn't dismantle patriarchy, he curates it just outside of the frame, presenting submission as a choice. He insists he is not a dominator, but a connoisseur, indulging in the aesthetics and pleasures of freedom. Now he turns to sex robots as the next frontier, harmless, programmable, and fully customizable. From fantasy to body type to scripted submissive femininities, he frames his libertine pursuit as artistic sexual consumption, a redefined indulgence in aestheticized violence, stripped of consequence and severed from the possibility of harm. If you want to see how apex progressive masculinity is narrated in our world without being recognized, watch the first 5 minutes of the first episode of You on Netflix.
Paula Fox, top shelves. You want me to?
Oh, no, I got it.
Oh, are you not wearing a bra? And you want me to notice? If this was a movie, I'd grab you and we'd go at it right in the stacks.
Have you read her fiction? Desperate Characters is her best.
That's what I keep hearing.
You haven't read
I know. I'm worried it's not going to live up to the hype.